there's a lot of things going on inside of our brains that are happening when we do art or when we see art or when we have aesthetic experiences, because that's what art also does. It allows us to go deep into our unconscious and work with that as well. The big part of chronic pain is this sense of being completely alone and isolated from the rest of the world. And when we make art, we communicate again. We get back into connection, not only with other people, but also with ourselves. When we talk about pain, we need to keep in mind that pain is something that happens in our brain, because stress, a memory of pain, all of these things influence how big the pain is that we experience from our brain.
Today's guest in the podcast is Thuli Wolf, an art therapist with a unique journey. In this episode, she shares why she left her career in medicine to pursue art therapy. We explore how art therapy works and its powerful role in healing trauma, chronic pain, and depression.
Frida Kahlo said, "I'm not sick, I'm broken, but I'm happy as long as I can paint."
What we know of her today, like all of these super famous paintings, they all happened after she had that accident, right? So before, she was not this huge artist. So the pain actually made her this artist. There are people who are driven, and those are the people who run away from something. And then there are people who have a calling, and those are the people who walk towards something. And you don't need to be chased by your trauma and by your fears to get somewhere. You can also create from a place of love. You can also create from a place of happiness, of curiosity.
Thuli Wolf, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
You started your career being a normal medical doctor, and then you transitioned into art therapy. Why? What was the motivation?
I think there were different events that came into place. And first, I was very unhappy in the situation that I was. And I realized that most of the patients came to me and they wanted to talk and wanted somebody that listens to them. And in the structure that I was, I did not have the capacity to provide what they actually needed. Yeah, I was always very creative since I was a child. I was painting and creating stuff, playing around. And yeah, when I was working as a doctor, I had one afternoon off every week. So that was the time where I was like, okay, let me get back to it. So I bought supplies, I started painting again. And then I was like, okay, I think I need to quit this job. I think I'm frustrated, I'm unhappy.
Okay.
And then I moved to Berlin, and then I tried different things, different jobs, and then I got into a real crisis, because then I was like, I don't know what to do with my life. And all the story that I told myself for the past 10 years, it's not true anymore. This is not the person I used to, or I thought I was. And then I realized with every time that I went more into this creative process that I was painting myself also through this period in my life. And then I was like, whoa, this is so powerful. And this is something I want to share with the world. And then I went back to university and studied art therapy.
How would you define art therapy to someone who has never heard of it before?
I would say it's like psychotherapy, but with art. So we talk a lot less, but we create more.
Walk me a little bit through the process. How does it work? For example, in a normal therapy, you go into a psychiatrist's office, you sit on this famous sofa, and then you tell them about what is going on with you. In this case, with art, how does that work?
So the sessions always start with a short check-in. So this is the moment where we talk about what is important for today, or how are you today? What do you bring to that session? And then there is a bigger part where you would create. and you can totally choose what you want to do. You choose your materials, you choose your topics, and then in the end we talk about it. So we talk about the process, what was going on inside you, what emotions arise, what thoughts did you have, and then we look at the result and we look, oh, what is this maybe telling you about yourself?
Okay, so it's like through the process and through the work that is being there done by the painting, you as a therapist, can you find out what is the patient's struggles or what is going on, like psychoanalysis based on what they're painting?
Kind of, but I would say I help them to find out.
And from the scientific perspective, what changes occur in your brain or how that actually works?
If we want to look at the more like scientific things that people find a bit easier to comprehend, is the part that we have a sensory experience. And most, I would say like 80% of our waking time we spend in front of screens or on the phone. So we don't really use a lot of our senses that much. But when we create, we do that. Like we feel, we smell the color. We even listen to, like when you are in a room where people make art, it has a sound, and we have this like multisensory experiences which create meaningful memories inside of us and gives us a sense of belonging. And the next thing is that we regulate our nervous system through art making. So what happens when we're stressed, when we have anxiety, when we're depressed, we go into this fight, flight, or freeze mode, and our blood pressure goes up, our heart rate goes up, our breathing frequency goes up. We are like in a state of hypervigilance. We're constantly checking the environment for threats. But when we make art, we can step out of this state and we can relax our nervous system. So we can reverse all of these effects. It has a calming effect on our nervous system. And we can even see that with certain colors. For example, blue colors are known to lower blood pressure, lower heart rate. And it's even used in pain medication. So, for example, with burn victims, when they come to the burn victim unit, they have to change the bandages a lot. And there's this project, and it's called Winter World. So they use a VR glasses and some soothing music. And in the VR, you can see like a snow world with glaciers and penguins. And they found out that while they were changing the Band-Aids, the patients had to or needed a lot less opioids for the procedure because they didn't experience the same amount of pain as without that. Okay. So there's a lot of things going on inside of our brains that are happening when we do art or when we see art or when we have aesthetic experiences. And the next thing, which is what you were saying about analyzing, is that we have symbolism. So basically when you paint something, I look how you use your materials, what is your relationship to the materials? Do you have any problems in the process? And maybe these conflicts that come up during that process also reflect on conflicts you have in your life. And then we look at the artwork itself. What is it saying to you? Like what can you see in it? Maybe things that were not so conscious to you, because that's what art also does. It allows us to go deep into our unconscious and work with that as well.
That's interesting. The first thing you said about having the patients having the VR, watching something peaceful in VR and that helping them feel less pain. I heard, for example, for people who meditate a lot, they also can come to a state that they can reduce the amount of physical pain they perceive through meditation.
When we talk about pain, we need to keep in mind that pain is something that happens in our brain. So, for example, if we have 2 times the same person and we stick a needle in their finger on Monday and we stick a needle in their finger on Friday, they have 2 completely different experiences, or they can have 2 completely different experiences, because stress a memory of pain. All of these things influence how big the pain is that we experience from our brain. When we go into a state of meditation, we can directly influence our brain and change the way we experience the pain.
If you live in Germany, you have worked less than 12 months, or if you have bought a new computer, or if you have to travel more than 30 minutes to your workplace, well, maybe it's worth filing your tax refund in Germany, because I think you might receive a very good tax return. I know that we think that it might be very complicated, or some people are even scared of the Finanzamt, but it doesn't have to be that complicated. Everything depends on the tools that you're using. For example, I use Wundertax. With Wundertax, you can complete your entire tax return online. What's more, you can calculate your potential refund, see what deductions you're eligible for, and determine whether it's worth filing before you even start. For example, I did it last year and I got 500 euros back. And some people even say they got more than 1,000 euros. So if you go to gutentag.wundertax.de, Wundertax like Wonder Tax, but with a U, they even have the website in English, so it will be easier for you. And it will take you around 20 minutes or even less. Also, that's the best way also to support this podcast. Gutentag.wundertax.de. Thanks for our sponsor, Wundertax. And now let's continue with the conversation.
Frida Kahlo said, I'm not sick, I'm broken, but I'm happy as long as I can paint. Mm-hmm. And she was someone who, after an accident, had a very hard pain on her back. Mm-hmm. And what she was saying with this, I believe, is that it was relieving the pain while she was creating something.
What I find so interesting about Frida Kahlo is that what we know of her today, like all of these super famous paintings, they all happened after she had that accident, right? So before, she was not this huge artist. So the pain actually made her this artist because she had nowhere else to go. She was bound to bed, and her father made her this easel that she could use lying down. And this was what she had. And I think in a way, we can influence the experience of pain through what I just said, right? You lower your nervous system, regulate yourself, come into a calmer state. You can enter a state of flow where you forget the outside, but also to process the emotions that come with pain. And I think especially when we talk about chronic pain, we need to talk about pain as a concept, not as something that happens only in the body or only in the mind, because you can't really differentiate at some point anymore which is which, because both of them just influence each other. So there's also this huge emotional component in every experience of pain that needs to be processed. And the art allows us to do that because it's a form of expression. It's a form of saying, hey, this is what's going on inside of me. And very often we lack the words, especially when we talk about trauma.
I think, for example, a lot of her paintings are result of her condition, of the pain or suffering that she was having. You could see this reflected in her paintings, and it's basically that the meaning which made her, that piece of art interesting and so important, creating so much impact. I see that also in a lot of artists, especially in music. The first albums are often the greatest for some artists because that was when they were poor. That was when they were maybe going through a breakup, and why their music becomes more superficial as they get more famous, as they have less problems, as they just start talking about money and fame, and then you feel like this has become very superficial. Where is the essence of this artist? And there's another one that I like a lot from a rapper from Spain. He has a very powerful sentence that he says, well, in Spanish he says, "Donde duele, inspira." Where it hurts, it inspires. Yeah. And that's something that I heard in his song, I think 15 years ago. And it's something that I always carry myself, that when something is hurting, it's where most of the inspiration comes from. And you can see it sometimes in the work of some people, some artists, even some entrepreneurs. When they're in their lowest is when you see the most impactful results.
Yeah, and that are also the artworks that touch us the most, right? It's because they connect to something inside of us that is also experiencing that pain, that knows what is going on, or that sees it's self-reflected. Like when you look at an artwork that touches you, you feel heard, you feel seen, you feel like somebody understands you on a deeper emotional level. And this is also a power of art. It's like the communication, and it gives you a sense of not being alone in your experience.
Yeah. Going back to chronic pain, as Frida Kahlo was having chronic pain, and a lot of people are suffering, and it can feel very overwhelming and also isolating for many people. How does art therapy provide an outlet for expressing and managing the emotional toll that they're living in this persisting pain?
I think a big part of being in chronic pain is that at some point you can't really talk about it anymore, because everybody has heard the story and it's not really going to end. So a lot of people retreat and they just don't talk about it anymore. So they isolate, they get lonely, they can get depressed. It's a big part of chronic pain, is this sense of being completely alone and isolated from the rest of the world. And when we make art, we communicate again. We get back into connection, not only with other people, but also with ourselves, because what we then allow to happen is that we create something other that is maybe comes from our pain or comes from the situation, or we're a person in pain, but it's something other than pain. So we can experience ourselves as powerful in a state where maybe we're helpless, or we feel overwhelmed.
I think I read a statistic that says that 80% of people have experienced some traumatic event in their lives. How did this trauma manifest in our mental and emotional health, and what role how can we use art therapy for these processes?
So we have, I think everybody knows trauma and knows pain and knows when bad things happen, but obviously only a very little amount of these people develop post-traumatic stress disorder. But what we can see is that the trauma that we experience influences our behavior, influences the way we enter relationships, because trauma is always something that occurs in relationship. It is never something that happens in isolation. It's always in relationship to someone else. And then the symptoms of the trauma also happen in other relationships than later in life. So I think that art offers this kind of relationship when we are in art, or when you are like in a talking therapy. It's just two people, right? It's you and me, for example. But when we do art therapy, there's also the artwork. So we have a bit more like a triangular relationship. So you have a relationship with your artwork, I have a relationship with your artwork, and we have a relationship. And this is what we work with. We observe the dynamics, we look what is happening in this triangle.
I think someone said trauma is not what happened to you, is what
happens inside you.
Can you expand more on that?
So if, for example, we both experience the same event and for you it's traumatic, for me it's just like daily business. And that is maybe because after that event, I could talk to someone about it and they were acknowledging my pain. They were there for me. They were hearing me out. And maybe someone to you said, no, I don't believe you. Or pull yourself together. It's not important. So it's basically this, can we deal with what happened to us? Can we communicate it? Can we feel safe after that? Is there somebody holding us? Somebody's there for us? Or are we completely alone with what happens to us? And that influences a lot how the trauma affects us.
Is it different, like between women and men, how they process trauma?
When we're very small, from a very small age, we are raised completely differently. And women or girls are raised to be more open about their emotions, whether with guys it's more like, oh, you don't cry, boys don't cry. But I think we also experience very different trauma. I think when you talk to women about what kind of trauma they experience, I think the experiences also are completely different to when you talk to man about it, I would assume.
Yeah, for sure. And always comes the between women, all of them have suffered some sort of like sexual harassment in their lives, and it's something that men cannot relate.
Yeah, and I think that is also why we are forced a lot more to connect with other women, to talk about what is happening, because it's also part of our survival mechanism.
Yeah. I'm interested in the process of how can art and especially art therapy can improve your self-confidence or self-awareness.
So one of the aspects is this process of creating something where there was nothing. You move out of the role of the victim of whatever happened to you. You make a difference with every brushstroke. It has an effect, like every choice you make has consequences, and you can create something from scratch. And I think that is a part of what we're in this world to do. I think we're all creative beings. We were brought to this world to create something, and stepping into that power of creating, I think that can be very, self-empowering, and also seeing what you accomplished. You can look back to all the artworks that you created, whether you like them or not, but you create something, and you can get self-confidence from that.
Does this help with people who have only suffered some sort of like traumatic experience or that have chronic pain, or also for people who just suffer in depression, or for who is art therapy a better treatment?
So you can use it for all sorts of mental illnesses. You can use it for neurodivergent patients. You can also use it for people with disabilities. There's not really, I would say, this one disease and that works with art therapy best. It's more like, do you like the process or not? Is this something that you can relate to? Is it something where you can open up to?
Is it? There's people who also find going to therapy very, very hard because they are not the best people, the best communicators, or they feel uncomfortable just telling someone all of their issues or their story or their problems. Maybe this is something that maybe eases in the process of breaking that kind of ice of talking to a stranger about your life.
Yeah, I think so. And then also the people who are scared to do therapy, because I meet a lot of people who think, oh, now I'm going to open Pandora's box and I won't be able to close it anymore. And with art therapy, it's also a space where we laugh, where we have fun, where I always say it doesn't only have to hurt to deal with your issues, to deal with who you are. There's also room for fun and for exploration and trying new things, failing, trying again. This is all part of therapy.
There is this stigma about going to therapy that someone thinks that you might be crazy or something's going wrong with you if you say, I'm going to therapy, and then people would say, what's wrong with you? But one of my fears about going to therapy is about, I don't know if when you go to therapy, you go there because there's something you want to change of yourself. But sometimes my fear is, what if I change too much? Because then it means like I would have to, if I realize stuff that changed me during therapy, what happens to the old me? And that's some sort of the fear. Have you ever heard that kind of argument before?
Yeah, it's classic resistance, the fear of changing. But I think we will always change.
Because all of the drives, for example, that I have in my life could be a result of a traumatic experience or some kind of complex that has been building through my whole life, and who has made me who I am. And all what is driving me every day is a result of that. If I work on those stuff from childhood or from my youth time, and it changed me, then what's the future for me if I don't want the things that I used to want, and I don't have the same drive as I had before. And that's some sort of the fear. And I don't know if a lot of people share this same kind of fear of, and then
what?
And then what?
Yeah, I think also a lot of artists have this fear because they believe they can only create from a point of pain. But if they heal, then there's nothing to create anymore. And I think it was Gabor Mate who said there are people who are driven, and those are the people who run away from something. And then there are people who have a calling, and those are the people who walk towards something. And you don't need to be chased by your trauma and by your fears to get somewhere. You can also create from a place of love. You can also create from a place of happiness, of curiosity. And this is also possible. You don't need to hold on to your trauma or to your pain for dear life.
Good point. I like that, not running away for, but to go towards something. I like that way to see in it. You moved to Berlin, you said, from Halle to Berlin, so you could become an art therapist to study again here. You study here, or you, after studying, you came here?
I studied art therapy here, yeah.
Okay. But you say you were born here, then you went to Halle, and then you came back here. Why did you want to come to Berlin?
It was not a rational decision. I was actually living in Munich before, and I didn't like it there so much. I couldn't connect so well to the space. And it was one of my very good friends and we went to school together, and she had a spare room in a house, and I was like, I'm taking it.
Okay.
So it was that simple, actually.
Okay. And well, Berlin, yeah, I mean, comparing to Munich, very different.
Very
vibe,
different.
Very different kind of people as well. In Berlin, it's more like this vision of like there's a lot of beton, concrete, and during winter, you have the typical winter depression, gray sky, and a lot of people feel more down during these days, especially right now. Like right now, we're recording here like in December. Why do people often feel more depressed during this season, especially in like here in Berlin?
Yeah, it's a shift of light. We lose sunlight, and our bodies, our mind, everything, our soul reacts to it. And there's different theories. Some say it's genetic, that you have a genetic predisposition. I think people who are already suffering from mental illness in I would say, like decent human weather, they also feel it a lot more. But then there's other theories that say because of the darkness, we produce a lot more melatonin. And melatonin is produced out of tryptophan, which is an amino acid inside of our body. So we use up all the tryptophan, but tryptophan is also used to produce serotonin. So that's how we then come into a lack of serotonin, because we don't have enough of that.
And serotonin is in charge of?
It's our happiness hormone. It's what, makes us happy. It's one of those. So there's this theory, and then there's a theory about vitamin D, that we lack vitamin D. And they even found some results and studies that people who do substitute vitamin D feel it less. But I feel it too.
What advice can you give to the people who are experiencing this winter depression, this seasonal depression?
So the first thing I think is just be gentle with yourself, especially in the beginning of winter. I feel it in myself. Like normally I need 6 to 7 hours of sleep. I'm an early bird, very energetic. And now I'm just like, let me sleep forever.
Yeah.
And I think then, like if you look in nature, most of the species hibernate in some way or another. I think we are the only ones thinking we need to push through this. And one part of it is just, make time for more sleep, make time for coziness, but not lose your structure completely. I think it's important to, especially in the morning, go out, get the little sunlight we can get, and exercise.
Actually, actually it's very unnatural what we do of staying in a place where we're not supposed to live during that season, because birds, they fly to the south, bears, they hibernate. A lot of species, they do hibernation, or they are like moving always to a southern place. It becomes worse after the Christmas season.
Yeah, because I think then Christmas is for a lot of people very exhausting, also emotionally. It's a very tense time for a lot of people. And then you're already tired. You're, like the festivities are over, the stress goes down, like the adrenaline goes down, and you're just like, and now I'm still in this darkness. And then it still takes a long time, especially here, to get nice again.
Yeah. The whole January feels like it's not yet started. So it's like this kind of, it's like getting up from bed, like your alarm sounds at 7, but you can only wake up at 7:30, 7:40. So this whole process of trying to wake up is January. January feels like I'm trying to wake up, but and then the year actually starts in February. That's for me the feeling. But yeah, I would like to, I hear a bit about your background. You said you are half. Your father is German. Your mom comes from Zimbabwe. How this combination play a role while you were growing up?
I think when I was younger, there was not much of a language for racism or for everything that happened. And I just last weekend gave a workshop about racism or for people experiencing racism. And I was also saying I suppressed a lot of things because I talked to my mom, and then she told me that she took me out of school because there I experienced so much discrimination, and I don't really remember that as like a clear memory. So I think, a lot was suppressed.
Yeah.
And it took me a while to also connect to the side of me, because I think a lot of my life I tried to be German, which is basically impossible because they always find a reason why you're not German enough. They always give you this feeling. You probably also know that when you're here, like it's very.
But for me, it's different because I actually am not German.
Yeah. But I mean, it's like they. How do I say this? It's like. There's always this, oh, where are you from? And then you say, oh, I'm from Halle. And then they're like, oh, but where are you really from? And then you're like, what are we talking about here? Yeah. It's not like I ever, like lived somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I think that, played a role when I grew up in a way, yeah.
And then later in your life, did you process that? Everything that you suppressed back then, did you find a moment to process it later?
I think it is still an ongoing process.
Yeah.
I think it's especially now triggered a lot with what's happening politically.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, and especially when you're actually born here, raised here, speak the language and everything.
Yeah, and you also have I think it's so conflicting because you have both sides in you, right? You have the history of the oppressor and you have the history of the suppressed, like both is in you in one person. And you're like, where do I belong? Who am I?
This is true. Like when they talk about this historical guilt that a lot of European nations, especially Germany, needs to carry when you are both, as you said, like oppressor, but also the oppressed. Which part is contributing to you? Do you also have to carry that historical guilt or not, right? It's
complicated.
Are you partially responsible of what happened during World War II or not? Or just half? Yeah. Interesting. Never thought about that. Let's see what my children will feel in the future. For those having a very high stress environment or a job which is very stressful, what types of art activities would you recommend to try?
So if you have very little time, what I always recommend is to start with a sketch diary.
Mm-hmm.
And I do that with all of my clients. And what it is, it's like every morning or every evening, whenever you have time, you make a little sketch. So you pick a color, you pick a shape for whatever it is that you're feeling in that moment. And you can take 2 minutes, 10 minutes, however much time you want to invest or you can invest into that. And you do that consistently every day. And then after some time, you can look back and maybe you can see some patterns, maybe some topics repeat themselves. You can also give titles to the little sketches. And I feel like that's a great way to get into a creative process. And that allows you also to reflect on yourself and reflect on how you feel.
Have you noticed that, for example, children, they tend to do art more and the more you grow up, the less art you're creating.
Yeah.
Why do you think that happens?
I think probably the first thing that happens is you go to school and then teachers judge your artwork. They judge your intuitive expression. And then a lot of people also that I talk to say, oh, I'm not good at art. Like I know it since I was little. I was really terrible at art.
Yeah.
And they just never tried again after one person told them, you suck. And I think this is one part. And I think the other part is that we live in a very productivity focused culture. So what we do needs to have an outcome. And if you look at, like rent prices, it also needs to create some monetary value. And art is not known to be the most stable form of financial income.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's often pushed aside.
They would say, why are you painting? Why are you drawing? Do you plan to sell them? Why are you wasting your time doing that?
Exactly.
It's my hobby.
Yeah.
I used to draw a lot when I was also a kid. And I would spend hours like during my teenage years drawing. And I really got good at it. And it's something that I never picked back. But I would think was a lot of like processing stuff. And also, like you said, you go into a mindfulness state when you're doing it, that time just passes by. Yeah. From your patients or from the people that you have known during this therapy, is there a story that has caught your attention or that has impacted you in somehow?
I mean, they all impact me. I always feel like even though it's my job to help people, I always think that everybody teaches me something as well when I'm with them. I mean, there's very subtle moments that I notice when people say something and then they create something completely different. And then I'm like, oh, but here I can see something completely different than what you're saying. And then they're like, aha. It's like these moments where you realize, maybe I am deflecting with what I'm saying, or I'm not really being honest with myself. And then in the artwork, you can see the honest version of them or another version of them. I think multiple things can be true at the same time, but there's always this, what I find interesting about this job is that it's very investigative. We're always, like looking for clues, looking for patterns.
Yeah. Why is art so important to you, and how has it shaped your understanding of healing?
I think when we look around in our lives, we're always surrounded by art, whether that's music, whether that's graffiti, whether that's an audiobook that we're listening to. And it is such an important part of our lives because it's just something that humanity has done ever since, time. They were coloring the caves and drawing in there. So, yeah, I think it's just part of our existence as human beings. And the amazing thing about this is that you don't need to be good at it to benefit from it. You also don't necessarily even have to do it yourself. So we know that just by looking at art, that has beneficial effects on your health. And I think it's this, the playfulness and the magic behind it, and also the things that we can't really explain that happen in a creative process that are hard to explain with words. And I think that is what I find so fascinating about it. And it's easily accessible, like everybody can do it.
If there's one takeaway for our listeners about the importance of art therapy and its role in healing, what would it be?
Yeah, you're allowed to do it. You're allowed to try it. You're allowed to play around, to explore yourself. You're allowed to find yourself as the creative being that you are. And I think that is one of the messages I would like our listeners to leave with.
Thuli Wolf, thanks a lot for being in the podcast and sharing a lot from what art therapy means to you and a lot of the impact of art in our lives and also in the healing process and how to process pain with art. Thanks a lot again.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Welcome to the show. It's the Golden Tide Podcast. It's the people who make